What if the person making the most accurate predictions about global events has no insider connections, no government backing, and no team behind him? What if he is just one guy sitting in his bedroom, scrolling through Twitter and YouTube, connecting dots that entire intelligence agencies seem to miss? That should make you very uncomfortable. Because it raises a terrifying question. If one independent mind can see what is coming, why can't the people in charge? If this kind of thinking excites you, do me a favor right now. Hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who is tired of surface-level news. Because what you're about to hear will change how you look at the world forever. Let me tell you something about how real analysis works. Forget the mainstream media. Forget the polished anchors reading teleprompters. Forget the carefully curated stories designed to make you feel informed while keeping you completely in the dark. Real analysis starts with one thing: dissonance. When something shows up in the news that does not fit your existing understanding of how the world works, that is the signal. That is where the truth hides, not in the headlines, in the contradictions. And that is exactly how Professor Jiang Sueqin operates. He does not have subscriptions to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. He does not watch CNN or BBC. He does not have ChatGPT. He does not have a research team. He has two sources: Twitter and YouTube, and a mind trained to detect when something is off, when a story appears that should not be there, when two people sit together who should never be in the same room, when a government leaks information that contradicts its own policies. That is where the real story begins. So let us walk through some of the most fascinating news stories he recently analyzed and understand the deeper layers beneath each one. The first story that caught attention was a viral interview involving Ivanka Trump. Now, here's the thing. Ivanka and Jared Kushner are famously private people. They do not seek the spotlight. So when they suddenly appear making public statements about a luxury resort project, that immediately raises a question. Why now? What is the agenda? These are not people who do things randomly. Every move is calculated. Every public appearance serves a purpose. The interview seemed innocent enough. It was framed as a passion project, a beautiful resort, a display of virtue and vision. But the public did not see it that way. Protests erupted in Albania over the luxury development, and that is where things got really interesting. Now, most people hear about protests and move on, but a trained analytical mind asks two critical questions. Who is organizing these protests, and who is funding them? Those two questions will tell you more about any protest movement than 100 news articles ever could. When you dig into the Albanian protests, you find environmental NGOs at the center. One group in particular stood out, a conservation organization operating in Eastern Europe. And whenever you see NGOs operating in Eastern Europe, there's one name that always comes up: George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is a pattern that is repeated across dozens of countries over the past 3 decades. The funding trail leads to organizations connected to wealthy conservation interests. The people speaking out against the resort on international media are young, articulate, English-speaking Albanians who studied abroad. They represent a very specific demographic. They are a minority within their own country. And they have been trained, whether they realize it or not, in the methods of Western-style political activism. This is the Color Revolution playbook. You build networks of NGOs across a country. You train young activists in Washington, D.C. You fund them generously. You give them media access. And when the moment comes, you activate the network. It has happened in Ukraine. It has happened in Georgia. It has happened in countless nations across the developing world. And now it appears to be happening in Albania. But here's the really uncomfortable question. Why do massive protests erupt over a luxury resort on an island, but there are barely any organized protests over actual wars happening right now? Think about that for a moment. The selectivity of outrage is itself a form of information. It tells you that organic anger is rare. Most large-scale protest movements have infrastructure behind them: funding, organization, media coordination. Without those elements, anger stays local and quiet. With them, it becomes a global news story overnight. Now let us shift to something even more consequential: the Pentagon and Israel. An exclusive report from NBC News revealed that officials inside the Pentagon are deeply concerned about Israeli spying on the American military. And this is not speculation. Israel has historically been one of the most aggressive intelligence collectors targeting the United States. More active than Russia, more effective than China. This is documented history. But the real question is not whether Israel spies on America. Of course it does. The question is, why is this being leaked now? For 50 years, nobody in Washington talked about Israel stealing nuclear weapons technology from the United States. Nobody brought up the USS Liberty incident from 1967. The Pentagon and Israel have been joined at the hip for decades. So why are Pentagon insiders suddenly going public with their concerns? The answer lies in something called Section 224 of the National Defense Authorization Act. This provision would dramatically deepen military cooperation between the United States and Israel, Critics say it would effectively merge key elements of both militaries, and that creates a terrifying strategic problem. If Israel starts a war, and Israel has a long history of starting wars, the United States would be automatically dragged into that conflict. No congressional debate, no public vote, just immediate entanglement. If Israel decided to escalate against Turkey or Egypt or Iran, American forces would be committed whether the American people wanted it or not. To understand the spin around Section 224, it helps look at how AIPAC, the most powerful lobbying group in Washington, tries to sell it. They published a document addressing what they call myths about the provision. And when you read their arguments carefully, something fascinating happens. Their rebuttals actually confirm the very concerns they are trying to dismiss. For example, they say Section 224 will not merge the two militaries. But their actual argument is only that Israel will not take command of the U.S. military. Nobody was saying that. The concern was about structural merger, not command takeover. They say Section 224 benefits America through improved defense cooperation. But if America was not fighting wars in the Middle East to begin with, American troops would not need that cooperation to stay safe. They say it is not a backdoor for military aid. But what the provision actually does is change definitions, so that aid to Israel becomes internal resource sharing rather than foreign assistance. That is accounting magic, not policy substance. When you read the opposing argument and realize it is full of holes, it actually strengthens your understanding. And that is a critical lesson in analytical thinking. Always read the other side, not to agree with it, but because when the other side's arguments are weak, it tells you the critics are probably right. Now pause for a second. If you're still watching, it means your mind works differently from most people. You're not satisfied with headlines. You want to understand the machinery behind events. That is exactly what this channel is about. So if you have not already, tap that subscribe button and hit the bell, and drop a comment below telling me which story surprised you the most. I read every single comment. Let us move to artificial intelligence, because something very strange is happening in the AI world. Bernie Sanders and Sam Altman appeared together in a headline about public ownership of AI. Now think about that combination for a moment. Bernie Sanders is an 80-plus-year-old socialist who has spent his entire career fighting corporate power. Sam Altman is the CEO of OpenAI, one of the most aggressively funded tech companies in history. These two should not be allies. They should be adversaries. So when they sit down together, that is dissonance. That is a signal that something deeper is going on. Here is what is really happening. AI companies like OpenAI cannot make money on their own. The technology is extraordinarily expensive to run. Data centers consume massive amounts of electricity and water. The infrastructure costs are staggering. And there is no clear path to profitability through market revenue alone. Look at oil futures for proof. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed for months. Oil should be at $200 a barrel. It is not even close. That tells you the pricing mechanism is being manipulated. These are not free markets. They are controlled environments where the house always wins. Now let us talk about something completely different but equally fascinating. Candace Owens went to Russia, and the first question everyone asks is why? Why would one of the most prominent conservative media personalities in America travel to Moscow? She posted on social media about how beautiful Moscow is. She made observations about how Russia replaced every Western brand. She highlighted the failure of American sanctions in a way that is both funny and devastating. And then she said something remarkable. She talked about building a bridge between Christians in the East and Christians in the West. She framed her visit as a mission of spiritual reconciliation between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, two branches of Christianity that have been separated for 1,000 years. This is not a casual tourist trip. This is strategic positioning. And to understand it, you need to understand who is behind Candace Owens and what they want. The assumption that makes the most sense is that Candace Owens has deep connections within the Catholic Church, not necessarily with the Pope, but with specific factions within the church that have their own agenda. Possibly Jesuit-affiliated groups. These are people of genuine faith who are alarmed by the direction of Western civilization, the materialism, the secularism, the moral decay, the collapse of family structures, the rise of figures like Andrew Tate. They see Candace Owens as a vehicle for spiritual revival, a charismatic black Catholic mother of 4 who lives her faith publicly. She represents what they believe young women should aspire to be. Her willingness to challenge powerful figures suggests significant backing. Nobody operates at that level of risk without protection. Her visit to Russia was likely designed to open communication channels. Both groups share a common enemy in secular Western liberalism. Both believe the modern world has lost its spiritual foundation, and both see the potential for a global religious awakening that transcends denominational boundaries. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. The FBI is reportedly investigating Candace Owens' trip to Russia. This echoes what happened with Tucker Carlson years ago. Tucker was scheduled to interview Vladimir Putin while still at Fox News. The CIA surveilled him, discovered his plans, and sabotaged the trip. Tucker eventually went to Russia much later. If you are still here, I want to ask you something honestly. How many channels give you this level of depth? How many actually connect the dots between Albanian protests, Pentagon leaks, AI bailouts, and spiritual movements? If this is the kind of content you have been looking for, share this video right now. Send it to a friend or post it on social media. Let us build a community of people who think deeply about the world instead of just reacting to it. Let us talk about game theory. Game theory removes you from personalities and emotions. It looks only at the structure of the game and player incentives. When you apply game theory to Iran, you realize that a ground offensive by Iran would be suicide. It would expose them to air power, which is where America and Israel are dominant. So Iran will continue with asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, proxy forces, hide and seek. That is the only rational strategy for a weaker conventional power. When you apply game theory to the claim that Iran already has nuclear weapons, the logic falls apart immediately. First, if someone gave you a nuclear weapon, how do you know it works? Second, a weapon without a delivery system is useless. Third, maintenance of nuclear weapons requires an entire industrial infrastructure. 3 bombs do not make you a nuclear power. And here is the most dangerous implication. If the narrative spreads that Iran has nukes, it justifies a preemptive strike. From a game theory perspective, people spreading this narrative are actually helping build the case for a nuclear first strike. The Iran situation is not going to resolve quickly. It is designed to be a forever war. Section 224 exists precisely to lock America into permanent military commitment in the Middle East. Israel provides the pretext. And the American people bear the cost in blood and treasure for decades to come. Intelligence agencies work in strange ways. Most people assume agencies are in mortal combat. The reality is far more disturbing. At high levels, they actually cooperate. They manufacture threats to justify their own existence and their ever-expanding budgets. They tell governments the other side will win. But behind closed doors, they are partners in the same game. Parasites on the nation, states they claim to protect. The same dynamic applies to AI. China and America are providing each other with justification to build surveillance states. China points to America to expand digital control. America points to China to pour billions into infrastructure. Both populations lose privacy and autonomy. Both governments gain power. It is a cooperative game disguised as competition. Peter Thiel understands all of this better than almost anyone alive. He is a strategic thinker in the global landscape. His moves follow a coherent long-term vision. He sees the world moving toward privatized military forces and AI-driven governance. Argentina, under Javier Milei, is already implementing policies that align with Thiel's vision of reduced regulation. The groundwork for what could become the first AI-driven civilian state is happening right now in plain sight. The American military itself is undergoing a transformation. First, there will likely be expansion focused on the Western Hemisphere. Places like Mexico, Colombia, and Greenland could see increased American military presence in the coming decades. Second, privatization of military forces will accelerate. Private military companies will sign contracts with allied nations. American military personnel could essentially become governors of occupied territories or employees of private corporations. For someone entering the military today, this represents both an opportunity and a moral reckoning. The work will look different. We live in a world where the most important information is freely available but deliberately buried under layers of noise. The tools to understand what is really happening exist. Twitter, YouTube, Google, a disciplined mind, that is all you need. The real barrier is not access to information. It is the willingness to sit with dissonance and notice when something does not fit, to ask who benefits, to follow the money, to read the opposing argument and find its weaknesses, to hold multiple possibilities in your mind simultaneously without rushing to conclusions. The world is not chaotic. It is a game. The players at the top are not random. They are strategic, calculating, and counting on you being too distracted to notice. Prove them wrong. Think deeper. Question everything. And never, ever accept the first explanation you are given. Because the truth is almost always hiding one layer beneath where everyone else stops looking.